In the world of aviation, few names carry the weight of Boeing. But behind the polished reputation and decades of success lies a scandal that shook the industry. This is the story of the Boeing 737 MAX, where innovation collided with greed and lives were lost in the fallout. It's the undisputed king of the skies. From the legendary 707 to the dependable 747, Boeing aircraft carried millions safely across the world. But by the mid-2000s, Airbus, Boeing's European rival, was catching up fast. Their A320neo was winning orders with better fuel efficiency and lower operating costs. Boeing needed a response, but instead of designing a new aircraft from scratch, they chose to upgrade an old one, the 737, a model that first flew in the 1960s. They called it the 737 MAX. It would carry larger engines for fuel savings, but the design decisions that Boeing's executives were under intense pressure. They feared losing market share to Airbus, and time was critical. A new plane would take years to certify, but modifying an existing design could be done faster. But retrofitting the larger engines on the old 737 airframe changed the plane's balance in flight. During steep climbs, the nose could pitch too high, risking a stall. To fix this, Boeing introduced a software solution, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, or MCAS. MCAS would automatically push the nose down if the system believed the plane was climbing too sharply. But here's the critical problem. Pilots weren't told about MCAS. In order to avoid costly pilot retraining, Boeing minimized the changes in documentation. MCAS was hidden, and its behavior wasn't properly explained. Even worse, MCAS relied on just one angle of attack sensor. If that sensor failed, the system could misfire, with catastrophic consequences. In 2018, that's exactly what happened. Lion Air, Flight 610 took off from Jakarta. Minutes later, the plane was locked in a battle against its own software. MCAS repeatedly forced the nose down. The pilots didn't understand what was happening. 12 minutes after takeoff, the plane slammed into the sea. All 189 people on board were killed. Boeing called it pilot error, but behind the scenes a different story was unfolding. Internal emails revealed that some Boeing employees were deeply concerned. One wrote, "Would you put your family on a MAX simulator-trained aircraft? I wouldn't." Still, Boeing pushed forward. Planes kept flying. And just 5 months later, tragedy struck again. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 took off from Addis Ababa in March 2019. Like Lion Air, the plane struggled to stay in the air. Again, MCAS forced the nose down. Again, the pilots couldn't regain control. 6 minutes after takeoff, the plane crashed into a field. 157 lives were lost. The world could no longer ignore the truth. The crash of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 sent shockwaves around the world. Within days, country after country began grounding the Boeing 737 MAX. China was the first to act. The United States, Boeing's home country, resisted until global pressure made it impossible to ignore. On March 13, 2019, the FAA finally grounded the 737 MAX fleet in the U.S. It was a public relations disaster. Boeing's once pristine reputation was now in freefall. the numbers were damning. 2 crashes, 346 lives lost, billions in aircraft orders frozen or canceled. And at the center of it all, MCAS. Investigations uncovered a pattern of deception and regulatory capture. Boeing had lobbied hard to keep FAA scrutiny light. In many cases, the company had been allowed to self-certify its own safety systems. The watchdog had become the lapdog. Internal documents revealed that Boeing employees joked about deceiving regulators. They spoke of hiding MCAS and manipulating training requirements, all to avoid delays, all to save money. The company's culture had shifted from engineering excellence to financial performance. As the scandal unfolded, Boeing's CEO, Dennis Muilenburg, faced a storm of criticism. He testified before Congress, apologizing but dodging key questions. The company ousted him later that year, but the damage was done. Airlines had lost trust, passengers were terrified, and Boeing's stock plummeted. Meanwhile, the victims' families demanded justice. They filed lawsuits, they held vigils, they spoke to the press with heartbreaking detail. Their message was clear. Boeing had put profits before people, and no amount of legal settlements could bring back their loved ones. By 2020, Boeing had redesigned MCAS to include multiple sensor inputs and made pilot training mandatory. The FAA cleared the 737 MAX to fly again in late 2020. But not everyone was convinced. Pilots' unions and safety experts still raised concerns. Trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. Boeing eventually paid over $2.5 billion in penalties and settlements, including a criminal fine. But nobody went to jail. The DOJ's deferred prosecution agreement angered many who believed Boeing got off lightly. It wasn't just about laws, it was about accountability. And for the aviation world, the lessons were painful. How could a company as respected as Boeing make such fatal missteps? How did the regulators become complicit? The Boeing 737 MAX disaster wasn't just about software, or sensors, or even pilots. It was about something deeper, the culture that shaped the decisions. In the quest for market dominance, Boeing had stopped listening to its engineers. Instead, executives obsessed over stock prices, deadlines, and cost savings. It was a playbook borrowed from Silicon Valley. Move fast, cut corners, optimize for growth. But airplanes are not apps. In many ways, the 737 MAX was a product of America's darker innovation mindset, where disruption trumps caution and accountability is optional. One internal email revealed a culture of arrogance. An employee wrote, "This airplane is designed by clowns, supervised by monkeys." It was a damning self-indictment from within. And yet, Boeing's leadership stayed the course until lives were lost. What kind of system rewards that behavior? At the heart of the issue was a financial obsession. Stock buybacks, executive bonuses, and aggressive cost-cutting had become the company's real business. Safety engineers were often overridden by marketing teams. This wasn't just a failure of engineering, it was a failure of values. And the regulators? They had become too cozy with the industry they were supposed to police. The FAA delegated so much authority to Boeing that the company essentially certified its own plane. It was a classic case of regulatory capture, where the watchdog becomes the servant. In America's push for deregulation, the line between safety and business blurred to the point of disaster. And what of the flying public? They were kept in the dark. Most passengers didn't even know they were boarding a 737 MAX. Transparency had vanished, replaced with PR spin and corporate deflection. The disaster forced an overdue reckoning. Aviation experts began asking tough questions. Should aircraft certification be independent of manufacturers? Should pilots have more control over automation? And most importantly, who is accountable when machines kill? These were no longer technical questions, they were moral ones. In the aftermath of the 737 MAX crisis, Boeing was forced to look inward. Executives promised transparency, engineers were brought back to the table, and internal processes were overhauled. New training programs for pilots were introduced, and updates to MCAS made the system more redundant and pilot-aware. But could these fixes undo what had already been done? For many, the trust was broken, perhaps forever. Airlines repainted the MAX name on aircraft, disguising its legacy with vague model numbers. Some passengers still avoid flying it. A decade ago, the Boeing name meant safety and reliability. Today, it carries a scar. This was more than just a corporate failure. It was a warning. A warning about what happens when innovation is divorced from integrity. When speed is prioritized over safety. When image matters more than substance. The 737 MAX Catastrophe is now taught in aviation schools, not as a triumph of technology, but as a failure of responsibility. Still, Boeing is not alone in this dilemma. Across industries, from tech to pharma to energy, corporations face the same temptation. Cut costs, ignore risks, and pray nothing goes wrong. But when things do go wrong, it's the public that pays the price. Just ask the families of Flight 610 and Flight 302. The Boeing story demands that we ask harder questions. Should safety be a cost center or the core of innovation? Should engineers serve marketing or moral judgment? And can a society addicted to speed ever truly value caution? These are the questions that will shape the next century of flight. Because if there's one thing the Boeing 737 MAX taught the world, it's this. Innovation without ethics isn't brilliance, it's a ticking time bomb. And when the system prioritizes profits over people, it's not just the company that crashes. It's public trust, it's institutional credibility, it's human lives. Boeing may rebuild, it may soar again. But the legacy of the MAX will remain, not as a marvel of engineering, but as a lesson carved into metal, software, and memory. Because the sky is not a place for shortcuts. And in aviation, every decision is written in lives.